Tonight, we're stepping back to a time when all the land on Earth was one. When you could walk from what we now call America to Africa without ever seeing an ocean. Imagine that for a moment. Let that thought settle into your mind like a gentle wave. There was a time, long before your great-great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother ever drew breath, when our entire world looked completely different. The continents we know today, the familiar shapes we see on maps and globes, were all pressed together like pieces of a vast ancient puzzle that had been perfectly solved. Take a deep breath with me now, in and out. As you breathe, let yourself drift back through time, through millions and millions of years, to an Earth that would be almost unrecognizable to us today. This isn't a story from a book or a movie. This actually happened. This was our planet's reality for tens of millions of years. The ground beneath your feet right now, the very soil and rock that supports your home, once touched lands that are now on the opposite side of the globe. Scientists call this supercontinent Pangea, which means all Earth in ancient Greek. But tonight, as your body begins to relax and your mind grows quiet, we're not going to get caught up in complicated scientific terms. Instead, we're going to take a gentle journey together, back to this time of unity, when our world was whole in a way it has never been since. Picture this: you're standing on a small hill, looking out across the landscape of this ancient Earth. The air around you is warm and humid, carrying scents that no human nose has ever experienced, because humans wouldn't exist for hundreds of millions of years. But in our imagination tonight, you can breathe this air, and it feels surprisingly familiar, like the air after a summer thunderstorm, clean and rich with possibility. As you look out from your hill, you see land stretching endlessly in every direction. There are no oceans to break your view, no great bodies of water to divide continent from continent. Just land rolling on and on toward every horizon. And here's something beautiful to consider as you let your shoulders drop and your breathing slow. If you were patient enough, if you had endless time, you could walk from where New York City will one day stand, all the way to where London will someday rise from the Thames, all the way to where the pyramids of Egypt will eventually touch the sky. You could walk everywhere, because everywhere was connected. But how did this happen? How did all the land on Earth come to be joined together in this magnificent way? The answer lies in one of the most patient, persistent processes our planet has ever known: the slow, inexorable movement of the continents themselves. Let your mind settle into the rhythm of geological time now. This isn't the time we know, measured in seconds and minutes and hours. This is deep time, where changes happen so slowly that mountains grow like plants, and what seems solid and permanent is actually flowing like thick honey. Take another deep breath, and as you do, imagine time stretching out like a long, peaceful river. Long before Pangea formed, the Earth's surface was broken into many smaller pieces of land, scattered across the globe like islands in a vast sea. But these weren't islands as we understand them today, static pieces of land surrounded by water. These were pieces of the Earth's crust, floating on a sea of molten rock far below, moved by forces so powerful and so patient that they could reshape the entire surface of our planet. Imagine these ancient land masses as gentle giants, moving through the primordial oceans at a pace so slow that you couldn't see it happening even if you watched. For an entire human lifetime, they moved about as fast as your fingernails grow, just a few centimeters each year. But when you have hundreds of millions of years to work with, a few centimeters per year can move mountains. Quite literally, as you lie here tonight, feeling your body sink deeper into comfort. Think about the patience of this process. These continents move toward each other with the slow inevitability of dawn breaking or seasons changing, or the way sleep gradually overtakes you when you stop resisting and simply allow it to happen. There was no rushing, no urgency, just the steady, peaceful progress of land moving toward land, and then, in slow motion, measured across millions of years, they began to touch. When the first two pieces of ancient continent met, it wasn't like ships colliding in the night. It was more like two vast, slow-moving clouds gradually merging in an endless sky. The edges of these landmasses pushed against each other with the gentle persistence of roots growing through soil, or ice forming on a quiet pond. But even gentle pressure, applied steadily across millions of years, can work miracles. Where these ancient continents touched and pressed against each other, something beautiful and dramatic began to happen. The rock and soil at their edges began to fold and buckle, rising up toward the sky like blankets being pushed together on a bed, layer by layer, fold by fold. The first mountains of the Pangean world began to form. Can you imagine standing at the base of these growing mountains? Of course, in real time, you would never see them move. But in our relaxed imagination tonight, you can watch as the earth demonstrates its incredible, patient power. Watch as layers of rock that once lay flat on the ocean floor begin to tilt and rise, carrying with them the fossilized remains of ancient sea creatures that would find themselves, millions of years later, embedded in mountaintops. These weren't just any mountains. Some of the mountain ranges that formed during the creation of Pangea were among the tallest our planet has ever seen. The Appalachian Mountains, which today stretch gently through the eastern United States, are the worn-down remnants of peaks that once rivaled the Himalayas in height and grandeur. As you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine these ancient giants in their full majesty, their peaks lost in clouds, their slopes covered in vegetation unlike anything we see today. But the beauty of this process wasn't just in its grandeur, it was in its completeness. As continent after continent joined the growing mass of Pangea, as mountain range after mountain range rose from their meeting places, something unprecedented was happening. For the first and only time in Earth's history, virtually all the land on our planet was coming together in one place. Think about what this means as you feel your own body coming together in rest tonight. Every piece of solid ground, every future site where cities would rise and rivers would flow, every location that would one day be called home by countless creatures, all of it was part of one continuous, unbroken whole. The spot where you're lying right now was connected by unbroken land to every other place on Earth as the final pieces of Pangea came together. As the last gaps closed and the supercontinent reached its full, magnificent size, our planet had created something it has never achieved again, a single landmass surrounded by a single global ocean. This vast ocean had a name too, meaning all sea. While Pangea gathered the world's land into unity, Panthalassa embraced everything else. A body of water so enormous that it contained more than our current Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, and Arctic oceans combined. Imagine trying to see across such an ocean. Imagine sailing day after day, week after week, without ever seeing land. But tonight, as sleep begins to call to you, we're not sailing on Panthalassa. We're standing on Pangea, on solid ground that stretches to every horizon, feeling the deep satisfaction that comes from wholeness, from completeness, from everything being exactly where it belongs. From our vantage point on this ancient supercontinent, Let's take a moment to really appreciate what surrounded us. The absence of the familiar boundaries and borders that define our modern world would have been breathtaking. There was no Atlantic Ocean separating Europe from America. There was no Mediterranean Sea creating a barrier between Africa and Europe. There was no English Channel, no Bering Strait, no Panama Canal, because there was no need for these divisions. Everything was connected. As you continue to breathe slowly and steadily, imagine walking across this connected world. Your footsteps could take you from the humid forests that would one day become coal deposits in Pennsylvania, across the rising mountains that would eventually become the Atlas Range in Morocco, through the vast deserts that would transform into the fertile fields of Eastern Europe, and onward to the ancient rocks that would someday anchor the cities of Asia. Every step would be on solid ground. Every mile would connect you more deeply to the wholeness of the world. There would be no need for ships or bridges or tunnels, just the simple, peaceful act of walking across a world that was truly one. But here's something wonderful to consider as your eyelids grow heavy. This wasn't just a world of endless sameness. The very size of Pangea created climates and environments that were more extreme and varied than anything we know today. The interior of the supercontinent, thousands of miles from any ocean, experienced desert conditions more intense than the Sahara. The coastal regions, warmed by the vast Panthalassa, supported lush forests and swampy lowlands where the first coal deposits began to form. And the mountains, the mountains that formed during this great gathering were spectacular beyond imagination. When continents collide, they don't just push up gentle hills. They create massive ranges of peaks, some reaching heights that would dwarf our modern giants. The mountain ranges of Pangea carved the sky with stone spires and jagged ridges that took millions of years to sculpt and perfect. As you sink deeper into relaxation, imagine standing in the foothills of these ancient mountains, feeling small and peaceful in the presence of such patient, enduring grandeur. The rocks around you hold the memory of incredible forces, of continents traveling thousands of miles to meet and embrace, of the earth demonstrating its power through the simple act of bringing everything together. But this enormous land held climates and landscapes unlike anything we know today. And as your breathing slows and your mind grows quiet, you might find yourself wondering what it would have been like to experience the seasons on a world where land stretched endlessly in every direction, where the weather patterns of an entire planet were shaped by having just one continent and one ocean. This is where our journey will take us next, but for now, let yourself rest in the simple, profound peace of a world made whole, a time when everything belonged to everything else, and separation was just a dream that the future held. As you settle deeper into comfort tonight, let's resolve that gentle mystery we left hanging in the air. Remember how we wondered about the climates and landscapes of Pangea that were unlike anything we know today? Well, imagine waking up on that ancient supercontinent millions of years ago and stepping outside to experience weather patterns and environments that no modern human has ever felt on their skin. Take a slow, deep breath with me, and as you do, let your mind travel inward from the lush coastal edges of Pangea, away from the moderating influence of the vast Panthalassa Ocean, deeper and deeper into the heart of this magnificent landmass. With each breath, we're walking further from the coast, further from the familiar rhythms of ocean breezes and gentle sea mists, into something far more dramatic and extreme. Here, in the deep interior of Pangea, thousands upon thousands of miles from any ocean, lay some of the most intense deserts our planet has ever known. But let me paint this picture for you slowly, gently, so you can truly appreciate the scale of what we're imagining together. Picture yourself standing at the edge of what might have been the largest desert in Earth's history. Not just a desert like the Sahara, which you could cross in a few weeks if you were determined enough. No, this was a desert so vast that you could walk for months in any direction and still find nothing but endless stretches of sand and stone, broken only by the occasional oasis or rocky outcropping that provided a brief moment of shade and relief. The silence in such a place would have been profound. As you continue to relax tonight, imagine that deep desert quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace so complete that your own heartbeat becomes a gentle drum, keeping time with the patient rhythm of the earth itself. In these vast interior deserts, the only sounds would have been the whisper of wind across sand dunes, the occasional crack of rock expanding in the heat of day or contracting in the cool of night, and perhaps the distant call of some hardy creature that had learned to thrive in this land of extremes. But why were these deserts so incredibly vast and dry? The answer lies in one of the fundamental rules of our planet's weather. Distance from water means distance from moisture. As you breathe slowly and evenly, think about how this works. Ocean water evaporates under the sun's warmth, rises into the atmosphere as invisible water vapor, and then falls as rain when the air cools. But air can only carry so much moisture so far inland before it releases its precious cargo and continues on, dry and thirsty. In our modern world, no place on land is more than about 1,500 miles from an ocean. Even in the heart of Asia or the center of Australia, you're never impossibly far from some body of water that can send moisture-laden clouds drifting inland. But in Pangea, you could travel 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles, even 5,000 miles inland from the nearest coast, moving ever deeper into a continental interior so vast that rain clouds from the distant oceans never, ever reached its heart. Imagine what that would feel like, standing in the center of such a place. The air around you would be incredibly dry, so dry that any moisture on your skin would evaporate almost instantly. The sky above would be a brilliant, cloudless blue during the day, so intense and clear that it almost hurt to look at directly. And the heat, oh, the heat would have been extraordinary. Without cloud cover to moderate temperatures, without nearby water to absorb and release heat gradually. These interior regions of Pangea experienced some of the most extreme temperature swings in Earth's history. During the day, surface temperatures could have reached levels that would be unbearable to most modern life forms, perhaps 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. But then, as you continue to sink into relaxation, imagine how dramatically things would change when the sun set over these endless deserts at night. Without clouds to trap and hold the day's warmth, without moisture in the air to buffer the temperature, the heat would radiate away into space so quickly that the same ground that was scorching hot hours earlier might actually become quite cool, even cold. The temperature difference between day and night could have been 70 or 80 degrees. Swings so dramatic that rocks would crack from the constant expansion and contraction, gradually crumbling into the sand that would blow in gentle, persistent patterns across the empty landscape. But here's something beautiful to consider as your own body. Temperature settles into the perfect warmth of rest. These extreme conditions created a kind of meditation in stone and sand. The rocks in these ancient deserts were sculpted not by rushing water or grinding ice, but by the patient, persistent work of wind and temperature change. Day after day, year after year, century after century. The landscape was being gently, slowly transformed by forces so subtle you could barely perceive them, yet so persistent that they could reshape entire mountain ranges given enough time, as we journey through our imagination tonight. Let's travel slowly outward from these silent desert hearts, toward regions where the influence of distant oceans could just barely be felt. Here, thousands of miles inland but still reachable by the occasional weather system, the landscape would have begun to change in subtle, beautiful ways. Picture dried riverbeds stretching across the desert floor like ancient highways, carved by waters that flowed only during the brief, intense rainy seasons that might come once every few years or even once a decade. These weren't rivers as we know them, steady, reliable streams that flow year-round. These were occasional torrents, powerful floods that would rush across the landscape for a few days or weeks when rare storms managed to penetrate far enough inland to drop their precious moisture on the thirsty ground. When these flash floods came, they would transform the desert temporarily into something almost magical. Seeds that had waited years in the sand would suddenly sprout and bloom, creating brief carpets of flowers that painted the barren landscape in brilliant colors. Creatures that had been dormant, buried in the sand, or sheltering in deep caves would emerge to drink and feed and reproduce in a frenzy of activity before the water disappeared again and the desert returned to its patient, quiet waiting. But let's continue our gentle journey outward, following these occasional riverbeds toward regions where they began to flow more regularly, where the influence of the distant sea grew stronger with each mile. As you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine walking along one of these ancient rivers, following its meandering path from the dry interior toward the more hospitable edges of the great continent. These rivers were extraordinary by today's standards, not because they were particularly large or fast, but because of the incredible distances they traveled. Imagine a river that began as snowmelt in mountains that would one day become part of Africa, flowed across what would someday be called Europe, and eventually emptied into the sea in regions that would eventually drift apart to become Asia. These were rivers that connected future continents, waterways that you could follow for thousands of miles across a single, unbroken landmass. Following such a river on its journey would have been like taking a tour of the entire world's climate zones in one continuous trip. You might start in cool, mountainous regions where the air was thin and crisp. Follow the water down through temperate forests and grasslands, across scorching deserts and humid lowlands, finally arriving at tropical coastal regions where the vegetation was so lush and dense you could barely see the sky through the canopy above. And what a different sky it was, as you continue to let your body settle into deeper relaxation. Consider this remarkable fact: the very air these ancient landscapes breathed was different from the air we breathe today. During the time of Pangea, the atmosphere contained significantly less oxygen than our modern 21%. Instead, it was closer to 15% oxygen, with higher levels of carbon dioxide creating a greenhouse effect that kept the entire planet warmer than it is today. This different atmosphere supported life forms that would seem almost alien to us now. With less oxygen available, the insects and early reptiles that lived during this time had to be incredibly efficient with their breathing and metabolism. But paradoxically, some of them grew to enormous sizes that would be impossible in today's oxygen levels. Picture, if you will, dragonflies with wingspans as wide as seagulls, soaring over the coastal forests of Pangea. Imagine millipedes as long as cars, crawling slowly through the leaf litter of ancient swamps. These weren't monsters or creatures of fantasy. They were real animals, adapted to their unique world, living their lives with the same quiet persistence that characterizes all life on Earth. These giant insects moved with a slow, deliberate grace that might actually be quite soothing to watch, without the need for quick movements that smaller insects require. They could afford to be leisurely, methodical, almost meditative in their actions. A giant dragonfly might hover motionless over a still pond for minutes at a time, its iridescent wings catching the filtered sunlight that came down through trees unlike any we see today. Speaking of those trees, let's pause in our mental journey to appreciate the forests of coastal Pangea. These weren't the familiar oak and maple, pine and fir forests of our modern world. Instead, they were dominated by tree ferns that grew as tall as modern redwoods, their fronds creating canopies so thick that the forest floor existed in a perpetual green-tinted twilight. Walking through such a forest would have felt like moving through a living cathedral, with columns of fern trunks rising up into the misty heights where the occasional shaft of sunlight created natural spotlights on the soft, spongy ground below. The air in these coastal forests would have been thick with humidity, almost breathable moisture that clung to your skin and made every breath feel rich and nourishing, unlike the sharp, dry air of the interior deserts. The coastal atmosphere was soft and enveloping, filled with the sense of growing things and the gentle sounds of water dripping from leaf to leaf in an endless, peaceful percussion. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the climate of Pangea was how it changed with the seasons. Because the supercontinent was so enormous, seasonal differences weren't just about temperature. They involved massive shifts in weather patterns that affected the entire planet. During summer in the northern parts of Pangea, the vast landmass would heat up like an enormous stone left in the sun. Hot air would rise from the interior deserts, creating low-pressure systems so large they could influence weather patterns across thousands of miles. This rising air would draw moisture-laden air inland from the coastal regions, creating what we might call mega-monsoons, seasonal rainfall events so massive they could temporarily transform vast areas of desert into flowering grasslands and seasonal lakes. These monsoons weren't gentle spring showers. They were torrential downpours that could last for weeks, dumping more water on the landscape in a single season than many modern regions receive in an entire year. Rivers that had been dry for months would suddenly become raging torrents, carving new channels and filling temporary lakes that might cover areas the size of modern countries. As you allow your breathing to become even slower and more regular, imagine standing safely on high ground during one of these ancient supermonsoons, watching sheets of rain sweep across the landscape like curtains drawn across a vast stage. The sound would have been incredible, not just the patter of rain on leaves, but a continuous roar like a distant waterfall that went on for miles in every direction. And then, as summer ended and autumn arrived, the process would reverse itself. The great landmass would begin to cool, the monsoon rains would fade, and gradually the landscape would return to its patient desert quiet. But the effects of these seasonal deluges would linger for months. Temporary grasslands would slowly brown and fade. Seasonal lakes would gradually shrink and disappear. The creatures that had emerged to take advantage of the brief abundance would retreat again to their patient waiting places, ready to endure another cycle of dry years until the next great monsoon season arrived. This rhythm of extreme abundance followed by extreme scarcity created a very different pace of life than we're accustomed to today. Instead of the relatively steady, predictable changes we associate with seasons, life on Pangea had to be prepared for dramatic swings between feast and famine, flood and drought, lush abundance and stark emptiness. Yet there was something profoundly peaceful about this rhythm too. Just as your body is learning to let go of the day's tensions and settle into rest, the life forms of Pangea had learned to flow with these great cycles, to rest during the difficult times and flourish during the abundant ones, never fighting against the natural rhythms but simply being patient and ready when conditions changed. The early reptiles that lived during this time were masters of this kind of patience. Unlike the warm-blooded mammals that would evolve later, these ancient reptiles could slow their metabolism to an almost meditative state during harsh conditions, using very little energy, waiting with the serene persistence of stones until the world around them bloomed again with opportunity. Imagine one of these early reptiles, perhaps the size of a modern crocodile but built more like a lizard, resting in the shade of a large boulder during the height of the dry season. Its breathing would be slow and shallow, its heart rate dropped to the absolute minimum necessary for life. It could remain in this state for weeks or even months, as patient and still as the desert around it, neither suffering nor struggling, simply being dot. And when the rains finally came, when the desert exploded into temporary life, this same creature would emerge from its meditation ready to take full advantage of the abundance, not frantic or desperate, but methodical and efficient, drinking deeply from newly formed pools, feeding on the sudden bounty of plants and smaller creatures, preparing itself for the next cycle of waiting. There's something we can learn from this ancient patience as we prepare for sleep tonight, just as these early life forms learned to flow with the great rhythms of their world. We too can learn to move gracefully between periods of activity and rest, between engagement with the world and withdrawal into the peaceful quiet of our inner selves. As you continue to relax, imagine yourself embodying some of that ancient wisdom. Feel how your breathing has naturally slowed to match the patient rhythms we've been exploring together. Notice how your heartbeat has become steadier, more peaceful, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, as it slowly, gently turned through its cycles of day and night, season and season, age and age. The creatures of Pangea lived their entire lives within these great cycles, never knowing that their world would eventually change, that the supercontinent would eventually begin to break apart, that the landscapes they called home would drift to opposite sides of the globe. To them, their world was simply the world eternal, unchanging, as permanent as anything could be. Yet even in this world of apparent permanence, forces were at work that would transform everything. Deep beneath the surface, currents of molten rock were beginning to shift. The same patient processes that had brought Pangea together were beginning, almost imperceptibly, to prepare for the next great change in Earth's story. But the life forms living on the surface knew nothing of these deeper currents. They lived each day as it came, adapted perfectly to their world as it was, demonstrating a kind of presence and acceptance that we might envy. They didn't worry about the future or regret the past. They simply existed, fully and completely, in the eternal now of their ancient world. As we near the end of our journey through Pangea's diverse landscapes tonight, from the silent heart of its vast deserts to the lush abundance of its coastal forests, from the patient waiting of its dry seasons to the explosive abundance of its monsoons, take a moment to appreciate the incredible variety that existed within this unified world. Despite being a single landmass, Pangea contained multitudes, It held within itself the seeds of every type of landscape we see on Earth today: deserts and forests, mountains and plains, rivers and lakes, all connected by the simple fact that they shared the same continuous ground. You could walk from the most extreme desert to the most lush forest without ever crossing a body of water, experiencing the full range of Earth's possibilities in one continuous journey. This diversity within unity is something worth contemplating as you prepare for sleep. Just as Pangea held all these different environments within one connected whole, you too contain multitudes within your single, unified self. You have your own deserts and forests, your own seasons of abundance and times of patient waiting, your own rhythms that ebb and flow like the ancient monsoons of this long-vanished world. And just like the life forms that thrived in Pangea's varied landscapes, you have the capacity to adapt, to flow with changing conditions, to find peace in both the active and the quiet times of your life. You can be patient during the difficult seasons and fully present during the abundant ones, trusting in the natural rhythms that govern all life on this ancient, beautiful planet we call home. Yet in this world of extremes, life was preparing for changes that would shape everything we see today. Changes that would scatter these connected landscapes to the four corners of the globe, creating the familiar map of our modern world while preserving, in rock and fossil, the memory of this time when everything was one. But those changes lay far in the future, beyond the immediate experience of the creatures that called Pangea home. For now, in our imagination, we can rest in the peaceful certainty of their world, feeling the solid ground beneath us that connected to every other piece of solid ground on Earth, breathing the thick, humid air of ancient forests or the crisp, dry air of vast deserts, listening to the patient silence of a world that thought itself eternal and was, in its own timeless way, absolutely right. As your breathing settles into an even deeper rhythm tonight, let's gently follow that thread we left hanging in the ancient air of Pangea. Remember how we spoke of life preparing for changes that would shape everything we see today. Well, imagine if you could sit quietly in those primeval forests and witness the remarkable story of survival and adaptation that was unfolding all around, so slowly and naturally that it would seem like the most peaceful process in the world. Take a long, slow breath with me now, and as you do, picture yourself settling comfortably against the massive trunk of an ancient tree fern in one of Pangea's lush coastal forests. The bark beneath your back is warm and slightly damp from the perpetual humidity, textured like cordial leather but soft enough to make a perfect resting place. Above you, enormous fronds create a living ceiling that filters the sunlight into gentle, moving patterns of green and gold. In this peaceful spot, as your body continues to relax into the soft forest floor, you're witnessing one of the most remarkable periods in the history of life on Earth. This was the time before dinosaurs ruled the world, when very different creatures walked through these ancient forests with a quiet dignity that would make you want to sit perfectly still and simply watch them go about their daily lives. The rulers of this Pangea world were called Therapsid, though that scientific name doesn't capture the gentle majesty of these remarkable beings. They were mammal-like reptiles, creatures that bridged the gap between the cold-blooded reptiles that came before and the warm-blooded mammals that would eventually include us. Imagine animals that looked somewhat like a cross between a large dog and a lizard, but with an intelligence and awareness in their eyes that spoke of something entirely new emerging in the world. These weren't the massive, thundering giants that dinosaurs would later become. Instead, they moved through their world with a measured, thoughtful pace that was wonderfully soothing to observe. Picture a creature about the size of a bear, but with the sleek build of a large cat, walking slowly through the dappled shadows of the forest. Its movements were deliberate and economical, each step placed with care, each pause filled with careful attention to the sounds and scents around it. What made these creatures truly special wasn't their size or their strength, but their adaptability. Unlike the reptiles that had come before them, these mammal-like beings were beginning to develop the ability to regulate their own body temperature, to maintain their internal warmth even when the external world grew cool. This was revolutionary. It meant they could be active in the early morning when other creatures were still sluggish from the night's chill, or continue hunting in the evening when the sun's warmth began to fade. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, imagine what this meant for their daily lives. While purely cold-blooded creatures had to spend much of their time basking in sunny spots, waiting for their bodies to warm enough for activity, these mammal-like reptiles could simply wake up and be ready for their day. They could hunt at dawn, explore during the comfortable middle hours, and remain active well into the evening, making the most of every moment in their ancient world. But perhaps the most wonderful thing about living on Pangea was the freedom these creatures enjoyed. In our modern world, animals are constrained by oceans, mountains, and other geographical barriers that limit where they can roam and how their populations can spread. But in the unified world of Pangea, a creature born in what would someday become South America could, if it chose, spend its entire life wandering and eventually die of old age in what would one day be called China or Australia or Europe. Picture this extraordinary freedom as you let your own body sink deeper into relaxation. Imagine following one of these ancient mammals on a journey that might last its entire lifetime. A slow migration that could span thousands of miles across varied landscapes, all on the same continuous landmass. Your creature might begin its journey in the humid coastal forests where you're resting now, drinking from clear streams that meandered through groves of giant horsetails and primitive conifers. As the seasons changed and food became scarce in its birth territory, it might begin walking inland, following ancient game trails that had been worn smooth by countless generations of travelers. Week by week, month by month, the landscape around it would gradually change. The lush forests would give way to more open woodlands, then to grasslands dotted with occasional groves of trees, and eventually to the edge of those vast interior deserts we explored together earlier. But our traveler wouldn't stop there. Being a creature of the forests, it would follow the scattered watercourses that provided green corridors through the arid lands, stopping to rest during the day in whatever shade it could find, traveling during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk. Its thick, fur-like covering would protect it from the temperature extremes, and its efficient metabolism would allow it to go for days on minimal food and water when necessary. Eventually, after perhaps years of patient travel, it might emerge from the desert's far side into entirely different forests, with different plants and different weather patterns, but still part of the same continuous world. Here, it might find a mate from a population that had been separated from its own ancestors for thousands of years, bringing together genetic heritage from opposite sides of the supercontinent. This free mixing of populations across vast distances had profound effects on evolution during the Pangean period. Instead of creatures becoming isolated and developing in completely separate directions, there was constant genetic flow across the entire landmass. Successful adaptations that arose in one part of Pangea could gradually spread throughout the entire population, making the species as a whole more resilient and adaptable. As you breathe in the imaginary air of these ancient forests, rich with the scent of growing things and slightly spiced with the warm fragrance of sun-heated bark and leaves, consider what the plant life around you would have looked like. These weren't the familiar oak and maple, birch and pine forests of our modern world. Instead, you would have been surrounded by some of the most beautiful and unusual plants Earth has ever produced. The trees, towering above you, were primarily seed ferns, not true ferns as we know them today, but plants that combined the delicate, lacy fronds of ferns with the woody trunks of trees and the reproductive innovations of seed-bearing plants. These seed ferns could grow to enormous heights, their trunks straight and strong, their crowns spreading in graceful canopies that filtered the light into an ever-changing pattern of sun and shadow on the forest floor. Below, mixed among the seed ferns, were the earliest conifers, primitive ancestors of our modern pines and spruces. But these ancient evergreens were quite different from their modern descendants. They were often shorter and more broadly spreading, with softer, more delicate needles that gave them an almost ethereal appearance. When the wind moved through their branches, it would create a sound like gentle rain, a soft susurrus that was incredibly soothing to anyone resting beneath their sheltering boughs. The understory of these Pangean forests was filled with giant club mosses and horsetails that could grow as tall as modern trees. Walking through such a forest would have been like moving through a fairyland, where familiar forms were rendered in unfamiliar sizes. Club mosses that today are small ground-hugging plants reached heights of 30 or 40 feet, their spiraling patterns of tiny leaves creating natural spirals and geometric designs that were both mathematically perfect and organically beautiful, but as peaceful and stable as this world might have appeared to its inhabitants. It was actually a time of incredible restlessness beneath the surface. As you continue to let your breathing slow and your body settle into deeper relaxation, imagine the vast forces at work deep below the forest floor where you're resting. The same processes that had brought Pangea together were still active, creating massive volcanic zones where molten rock from deep within the earth forced its way to the surface. These weren't just occasional volcanic eruptions, but ongoing areas of intense geological activity that created vast fields of lava and clouds of ash that could affect weather patterns across entire continents. Picture, if you will, regions of Pangea where the ground itself glowed red at night, where geysers of superheated water shot hundreds of feet into the air, where new land was being created even as older surfaces were transformed by the patient, persistent work of underground fires. The creatures living in these regions would have developed remarkable adaptations to their volcanically active environment, perhaps gathering near warm springs during cold periods, or using the reliable heat from geothermal areas to incubate their eggs. But these ongoing volcanic processes were signs of something much larger building toward a crescendo. Deep within the earth, pressures were accumulating that would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic events in our planet's history, an event that would test life's capacity for survival to its absolute limits. This event has come to be known as the Great Dying, and it represents both the darkest moment and the most inspiring example of resilience in the story of life on Earth. As you rest comfortably in your imaginary spot beneath the ancient trees, let me tell you about this remarkable period in a way that emphasizes not the catastrophe itself, but the incredible tenacity and adaptability that allowed life to not just survive, but eventually flourish beyond anything that had existed before. Imagine the world slowly changing around our peaceful forest sanctuary. At first, the changes would have been almost imperceptible, perhaps the air becoming slightly hot, the sunsets taking on more vivid colors due to particles in the atmosphere, the weather patterns becoming a bit more erratic and extreme. The massive volcanic activity that had been confined to certain regions was expanding, becoming more intense, affecting larger and larger areas of the supercontinent. The creatures living through these changes wouldn't have understood what was happening in terms of global processes, but they would have responded in the way life always responds to challenges, by adapting, by finding new ways to survive, by becoming more resourceful and resilient. Some species that had thrived in the stable conditions of earlier periods found themselves struggling, while others that had previously been minor players in the ecosystem suddenly found new opportunities as the volcanic activity intensified. Vast amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases were released into the atmosphere, changing its composition in ways that affected everything from the climate to the chemistry of the oceans. Temperatures rose, weather patterns shifted, and many of the stable environmental niches that creatures had depended on for millions of years began to change or disappear entirely. But here's what's remarkable, and what might help you appreciate the incredible resilience of life as you prepare for your own rest tonight. Even during the most challenging phases of this great transition, life never gave up. Creatures that found their traditional food sources disappearing learned to eat different plants, or became scavengers, or developed entirely new feeding strategies. Species that had lived in forests adapted to more open environments, while others learned to shelter in caves or burrow underground to escape the changing conditions at the surface. The most successful survivors during this time were often the smallest and most adaptable creatures, while large, specialized animals that required very specific conditions struggled to cope with the rapidly changing world. Small, mammal-like reptiles with flexible diets and adaptable behaviors thrived. These humble survivors were learning skills and developing characteristics that would serve their descendants well for hundreds of millions of years to come. Among these survivors were the direct ancestors of mammals, including ultimately our own lineage. Picture these small, furry creatures, no larger than modern rats, making their living in the changing world of Lake Pangea. They were nocturnal, which helped them avoid both the temperature extremes and the larger predators of the day. They were omnivorous, able to eat everything from insects to seeds to small reptiles, which meant they could find food even when traditional food webs were disrupted. Most importantly, they were social creatures that took care of their young, teaching them the skills they needed to survive in an uncertain world. This investment in the next generation meant that successful adaptations could be passed on not just through genetics, but through learned behaviors, creating a kind of cultural evolution that accelerated their ability to cope with changing conditions. As you breathe slowly and evenly, imagine one of these small survivors settling down for the day in a cozy burrow, surrounded by its family, safe from the harsh conditions outside. Despite living through one of the most challenging periods in Earth's history, this little creature is content and peaceful, demonstrating the same kind of trust in life's basic goodness that you can feel as you prepare for sleep tonight. These small survivors had an incredible secret weapon in their struggle for survival. They were while the reptiles around them became sluggish when temperatures dropped or rose beyond their comfort zones, these early mammals could maintain their internal temperature and remain active and alert regardless of external conditions. This meant they could hunt when others couldn't, escape from danger when others were too slow to react, and take advantage of opportunities that others missed. But perhaps even more remarkable was their approach to reproduction and child-rearing. Unlike reptiles that laid eggs and then left them to develop on their own, these mammalian ancestors provided milk and care for their young, creating strong family bonds and ensuring that each new generation learned not just how to survive, but how to thrive in whatever conditions they encountered. Picture a mother mammal from this ancient time, no bigger than a modern mouse, nursing her tiny babies in the safety of their underground home. Above ground, the world might be harsh and uncertain, but here in this small, warm space, life continues with the same patient determination it has always shown. The mother's body provides not just nourishment, but comfort and security, demonstrating the power of care and connection. That would become one of the defining characteristics of mammalian life. This approach to raising young meant that successful survival strategies could be taught and learned, not just inherited. A mother who had learned to find food in new places, or to recognize the signs of dangerous weather, or to build especially secure shelters, could pass these skills directly to her offspring. This kind of cultural learning allowed populations to adapt much more quickly than species that relied solely on genetic evolution. As the challenging conditions of the Great Dying gradually gave way to more stable times, these small survivors found themselves in a world with new opportunities. Many of the ecological niches that had been occupied by larger creatures were now empty, available to be filled by the descendants of the humble, survivors who had persevered through the difficult times. This is where we see evolution beginning to accelerate in truly remarkable ways. With so many new possibilities available, and with populations that had been strengthened by surviving the ultimate test, life began to diversify and experiment with new forms at an unprecedented rate. The connected nature of Pangea meant that successful innovations could spread quickly across the entire supercontinent, while the vast size of the landmass provided endless opportunities for different populations to try different approaches to the business of living. Some descendants of the small survivors began to grow larger, taking advantage of the reduced competition for plant food and the abundance of smaller prey species. Others remained small but became highly specialized, developing amazing adaptations for particular ways of life. Still others began to explore entirely new environments, perhaps becoming the first truly aquatic mammals, or learning to glide from tree to tree in the recovering forests, as you continue to relax into deeper and deeper comfort. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of these evolutionary innovations taking place. This wasn't a frantic, desperate struggle for survival, but rather a gradual, patient exploration of possibilities. Each generation was slightly better adapted to its world than the last, each small improvement building on the successes of the previous generation, creating a steady, peaceful progression toward greater complexity and capability. The forests where you're resting in your imagination were slowly recovering too, developing new combinations of plants that had never existed before. Some seed ferns learned to grow in the altered soils left by volcanic activity, while new types of conifers developed that could tolerate the changed atmospheric conditions. The recovering ecosystems were like vast, slow experiments in living, with countless species trying countless approaches to the fundamental questions of how to find food, how to reproduce, and how to survive in a world that was constantly, gently changing. What emerges from this picture is not a sense of struggle or competition, but rather one of incredible creativity and collaboration. Species that had survived the Great Transition together had learned to support each other in complex webs of mutual benefit. Plants provided food and shelter for animals, while animals helped plants reproduce by dispersing their seeds and pollinating their flowers. Predators kept prey populations healthy by removing weak or sick individuals, while prey species provided the energy that predators needed to thrive. This interconnectedness, this sense that every creature played an important role in the larger story of life, created ecosystems that were remarkably stable and resilient. When changes occurred, as they inevitably did, the whole system could adapt together, with each species making small adjustments that helped maintain the balance of the whole dot as you breathe. In the peaceful air of this recovering world, you might find yourself feeling a deep sense of connection to this ancient story of survival and renewal. The same life force that helped those small mammals persevere through the greatest challenges Earth has ever presented flows through you tonight. The same patience and adaptability that allowed life to not just survive but flourish in the changing world of Pangea lives in your own capacity to rest, to restore, to face tomorrow's challenges with quiet confidence and resilience. Hope, the small survivors who were your ancestors, didn't just endure the Great Transition. They used it as an opportunity to develop new capabilities that made them stronger and more adaptable than ever before. In the same way, the challenges you face in your own life are opportunities to develop new strengths, new sources of resilience, new ways of finding peace and stability even when the world around you seems uncertain. Just as those ancient mammals learned to find comfort and security in their family bonds, you can find comfort tonight in your connection to this incredible story of life's persistence and creativity. You are part of an unbroken chain of survivors that stretches back hundreds of millions of years, each generation having faced its own challenges and found its own ways to not just survive, but to thrive and contribute to the ongoing miracle of life on Earth. The world of Pangea was a world where life learned some of its most important lessons about adaptation, resilience, and the power of community. In the connected ecosystems of that ancient supercontinent, creatures discovered that survival wasn't just about individual strength, but about finding ways to support each other, to share resources, to create stable communities that could weather any storm. These lessons are still available to us today. In our own connected world, we can draw on the same wisdom that helped life flourish in ancient Pangea, the understanding that we're all part of the same living system, the knowledge that taking care of each other strengthens everyone, and the faith that life has an incredible capacity to find new solutions to any challenge it encounters. As we near the end of our journey through the living world of Pangea, take a moment to appreciate the incredible diversity that evolution created in this unified environment. From the smallest burrowing mammals to the largest mammal-like reptiles, from the delicate seed ferns to the massive club mosses, from the patient volcanic landscapes to the lush recovering forests, Pangea was a world that contained every possibility, every adaptation, every solution that life could imagine. And all of this diversity, all of this creativity, all of this patient experimentation was taking place on a single, connected landmass where innovations could spread and intermingle and give birth to ever more remarkable combinations. It was a world where life could truly explore its full potential, where the constraints that separate populations in our modern world simply didn't exist. But deep beneath Pangea's surface, forces were stirring that would eventually tear this world apart. Forces that would scatter the continents to the four corners of the globe, creating the isolated landmasses where evolution would continue its work in new and different directions. The same patient, persistent geological processes that had brought Pangea together were beginning to prepare for the next great chapter in Earth's story. Yet for now, in the peaceful forests of our imagination, that future seems impossibly distant. The creatures around you are living fully in their present moment, adapted perfectly to their world as it is, demonstrating the same kind of presence and acceptance that can help you rest peacefully tonight. They trust in life's basic goodness, in the stability of the natural rhythms that sustain all living things, in the quiet certainty that tomorrow will bring whatever it brings, and they will be ready to meet it with the same patient grace that has carried life through every challenge for hundreds of millions of years. The slow farewell section for as you settle even more deeply into rest tonight, breathing slower and slower with each gentle exhale. Let's finally reveal those mysterious forces we've sensed stirring beneath Pangea's peaceful surface, deep below the forests where our ancient ancestors made their homes, far beneath the roots of the giant seed ferns and the burrows of the small mammals. Something profound was beginning to happen, something so gradual and patient that it would take millions of years to complete, yet so powerful that it would reshape the entire face of our planet. Picture yourself floating peacefully above the Earth, looking down at the magnificent supercontinent of Pangea spread out below you like a vast, living map. From this serene vantage point, breathing in rhythm with the slow pulse of geological time itself, you're about to witness one of the most gentle yet transformative processes our planet has ever undertaken. This isn't a violent catastrophe or a sudden breaking apart, but rather something more like the way a sleeping person slowly, naturally shifts position during the night, finding a new arrangement that feels more comfortable and sustainable. Deep within the Earth, currents of molten rock had been flowing in great, patient circles for millions of years, driven by heat from the planet's core. These currents moved like incredibly slow rivers of liquid stone, carrying warmth from the deep interior up toward the surface, then cooling and sinking back down again in an endless, meditative cycle. For ages, these deep currents had been bringing the continents together, carrying them across the Earth's surface like passengers on an enormous, slow-moving carousel. But now, as you continue to breathe deeply and let your body sink into complete relaxation, imagine these same currents beginning to change direction, as naturally and inevitably as the tide turning or the seasons shifting from summer to autumn. The forces that had patiently gathered all the world's land into one unified mass were now beginning to reverse themselves, preparing to gently carry that land apart again, spreading it across the globe in a new arrangement that would create the familiar world we know today. The first signs of this great transformation appeared as tiny cracks in the ground, so small and subtle that the creatures living above them would barely have noticed. Imagine walking through one of those ancient forests and coming across what looked like a simple crack in the rock, perhaps no wider than your hand. You might step across it without a second thought, never realizing that you were witnessing the very first breath of a new ocean being born. These initial fractures appeared along lines of weakness that had been developing in Pangea's crust for millions of years, just as a piece of cloth might develop tiny stress points where it will eventually tear. The supercontinent had areas where the rock was under particular strain from the immense forces holding such a vast landmass together. When the deep currents began to shift and pull in new directions, these stress points became the places where Pangea would begin its slow, gentle farewell to itself. As you rest here tonight, imagine the incredible patience of this process. These first cracks didn't suddenly tear open like a zipper being pulled. Instead, they widened at a pace that was almost imperceptible. Perhaps a few millimeters per year, about as fast as your hair grows. A crack that was narrow enough to step across in the morning might, over the course of several human lifetimes, become wide enough that you'd need a small log to bridge it. Over the course of thousands of years, it might become a stream bed. Over hundreds of thousands of years, a valley, and eventually, after millions of years of patient expansion, an ocean. The beautiful thing about this gradual pace is that life had time to adapt to every stage of the transformation. The creatures living near these slowly expanding rifts didn't experience sudden, catastrophic changes to their environment. Instead, they had countless generations to adjust to the slowly changing conditions, to develop new behaviors and adaptations that allowed them to thrive in their evolving world. Picture a family of those small mammalian survivors we met earlier, living near one of these early rift valleys. Over the course of many generations, they would have watched their familiar stream gradually widen into a small river, then a larger river, then eventually a narrow arm of the sea. Each generation would have been perfectly adapted to the world they knew, while carrying within their genes and their learned behaviors the flexibility to adjust to whatever changes the next generation might encounter. This is the secret of life's great success. This ability to be completely present in the current moment while remaining flexible enough to flow with whatever changes the future might bring. As these rift valleys continued to slowly expand, something magical began to happen. Water from the vast Panthalassa Ocean started to seep into the lowest parts of these developing cracks, creating the first new bodies of water that Pangea had seen in millions of years. Initially, these were just shallow, narrow inlets, perhaps no different from the fjords or estuaries we might see today. But they represented something revolutionary, the beginning of the end of the unified world. Imagine standing on the shore of one of these early seas, breathing in air that carried new scents. The salt tanks of ocean water mixing with the familiar fragrance of inland forests. The water would have been incredibly clear and blue, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror, creating a sense of openness and possibility that hadn't existed in the deep interior of Pangea for countless ages. These new waterways brought with them new weather patterns, new sources of moisture that could penetrate further inland than ever before. Areas that had been dry for millions of years began to experience occasional rains as sea breezes carried moisture from these growing inland seas. The rigid climate patterns of the supercontinent, the vast interior deserts, the coastal humidity, began to soften and diversify as the land slowly reorganized itself around these new bodies of water. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, imagine how peaceful this transformation would have been to witness. There was no violence in it, no sudden disasters or catastrophic events, just the slow, patient work of the earth reshaping itself, like a sleeper gradually shifting into a more comfortable position day by day. Year by year, century by century, the rifts widened, the seas expanded, and what had once been continuous land began to separate into the distinct continents we know today. The process was so gradual that for millions of years, you could still have walked from one side of a developing ocean to the other during low tide, or perhaps by island hopping across chains of high ground that hadn't yet been submerged. Families of creatures on opposite sides of these slowly widening seas could still occasionally meet and interbreed, maintaining genetic connections even as their populations began to drift apart both physically and evolutionarily. But as the rift valleys continued to widen and deepen, As the new oceans expanded and matured, these connections became more and more tenuous. What had once been a short walk across a narrow valley became a day's journey around a growing lake, then a several-day journey around an expanding sea, then eventually an impossible ocean crossing that would require technologies and skills that wouldn't be developed for hundreds of millions of years. This is how the Atlantic Ocean was born, not in a sudden, violent splitting apart, but through this incredibly gradual, patient process of rifting and expansion. Imagine the very first moment when what would become North America finally lost its last land connection to what would become Europe and Africa. It might have been nothing more dramatic than a particularly high tide flowing over a narrow strip of land that had been getting lower and lower for thousands of years. On that day, perhaps some small creature tried to cross from one side to the other and found, for the first time in the history of the world, that there was no longer any solid ground connecting these two parts of what had once been unified Pangea. That creature might have stood at the water's edge for a moment, puzzled by this new barrier, before simply turning around and finding another way to go about its day, never knowing it had just witnessed one of the most significant moments in Earth's geological history, as you allow your breathing to become even slower and more peaceful. Consider how this process of separation continued to unfold over millions of years. The narrow strait that had just formed continued to widen, becoming first a small sea, then a larger sea, then finally the vast Atlantic Ocean we know today. What had started as a crack you could step across eventually became a body of water so wide that it would take weeks to sail across, so deep that it could swallow entire mountain ranges, so permanent that it would endure for hundreds of millions of years. But the Atlantic wasn't the only new ocean being born during this slow farewell. All around Pangea, similar rifting processes were taking place, creating the Indian Ocean, expanding the Pacific, and establishing the basic pattern of continents and oceans that we see on our modern maps. Each new body of water brought with it new possibilities for life, new environments that had never existed before, new challenges and opportunities that would drive evolution in directions that would have been impossible in the unified world of Pangea. The formation of these new oceans created entirely different climate patterns across the separating continents, where once the interior of Pangea had been locked in permanent desert conditions due to its distance from any moderating ocean influence. Now the newly separated land masses each had their own coastlines, their own weather patterns, their own seasonal rhythms. The extreme continental climate of the supercontinent gave way to more moderate, more varied conditions that could support a much greater diversity of life. Picture the coast of what would become North America as it slowly drifted away from its ancestral connection to Europe and Africa, where once there had been continuous land stretching to every horizon. Now there was the endless blue expanse of a growing ocean. The creatures living along this new coastline experienced weather patterns that their ancestors had never known. Ocean breezes brought moisture far inland, creating lush forests where deserts had once stretched. Seasonal storms born over the warming waters brought regular rains that supported entirely new types of ecosystems. As the continents continued their slow drift apart, the climate changes became more and more pronounced. The massive monsoon systems that had once swept across the entire supercontinent broke down into smaller, more manageable weather patterns. The extreme temperature variations that had characterized Pangea's interior were replaced by the more moderate, ocean-influenced climates that could support a much wider variety of plant and animal life. This climatic diversification created countless new ecological niches, new opportunities for life to experiment with, different approaches to survival and reproduction. One of the most remarkable consequences of Pangea's breakup was how it allowed evolution to take different paths on different continents. When creatures were separated by growing oceans, they could no longer interbreed and share genetic innovations. Instead, populations that had once been part of the same species began to develop independently, adapting to the specific conditions of their particular landmass. This process, called allopatric speciation, dramatically accelerated the pace of evolutionary change and led to an explosion of biodiversity that continues to this day. Imagine how this worked in practice. A population of early reptiles that had been widespread across Pangea might find itself split when a new ocean formed. The group that ended up on what would become South America would face very different environmental challenges than the group that remained on what would become Africa. Over millions of years, these separated populations would develop in completely different directions, eventually becoming so different that they would be considered entirely separate species, even separate families or orders of animals. This is how the breakup of Pangea set the stage for the incredible diversity of life we see today. Without the separation of the continents, evolution might have continued to produce variations on the same basic themes. But with populations isolated on different landmasses, life was free to explore entirely new possibilities, to experiment with forms and behaviors that would have been impossible in the more uniform environment of the supercontinent. As you continue to relax into deeper and deeper comfort, picture one of the most famous beneficiaries of this continental separation, the dinosaurs. These remarkable creatures first appeared during the later stages of Pangea's existence, when the supercontinent was just beginning to show the first signs of breaking apart. Initially, dinosaurs were small, agile creatures, not much different from the other reptiles sharing their world. But as the continents separated and new environments became available, dinosaurs began to diversify in ways that would make them the dominant land animals for over 150 million years. The early dinosaurs were able to spread across the still connected parts of Pangea, establishing populations on all the major landmasses before the oceans became too wide to cross. Then, as the continents drifted apart, these separated dinosaur populations began to evolve independently, developing the incredible variety of forms that we find in the fossil record. The long-necked sauropods that grew to enormous sizes on some continents, the armored ankylosaurs that developed heavy defensive plates, the swift, intelligent raptors with their fearsome claws. All of these represent different evolutionary solutions to the challenges of life on the separating continents. Picture a herd of early dinosaurs living near one of the slowly widening rifts that would eventually become the Atlantic Ocean. These creatures might have spent their entire lives near the shore of this growing sea, watching it widen imperceptibly year by year, never realizing that they were witnessing one of the most significant events in the history of life on Earth. Their descendants on opposite sides of the widening ocean would eventually become so different that they would be classified as completely separate species, perhaps even separate families, all because of this slow, patient geographical change. The beauty of this process is that it happened so gradually that no generation of dinosaurs ever experienced it as a dramatic disruption. Each group continued to live peacefully in its familiar environment, adapting slowly to the gradual changes around it. never aware that it was participating in one of evolution's greatest experiments. The separation of the continents provided evolution with multiple laboratory spaces where life could try different approaches to similar problems, leading to the incredible diversity of dinosaur forms that populated the Earth for so many millions of years. As the oceans continued to widen and the continents continued to drift apart, each landmass developed its own unique assemblage of plant and animal life. The forests that had once stretched continuously across Pangea began to differentiate, with different continents developing different types of trees, different understory plants, different seasonal patterns. These botanical differences, in turn, drove further evolutionary changes in the animals that depended on plants for food and shelter. Some continents became dominated by flowering plants, which first appeared during the breakup of Pangea and co-evolved with new types of insects and other pollinators. Other continents remained dominated by the more ancient conifers and ferns, supporting very different communities of plant-eating animals. These differences accumulated over millions of years, creating the distinct biogeographical regions that naturalists first noticed in the modern world. Differences that can only be explained by understanding the slow breakup of the ancient supercontinent. But perhaps the most profound effect of Pangea's dissolution was how it changed the very nature of life's relationship with the planet. In the unified world of the supercontinent, life had been constrained to work within a single, albeit varied, environment. The breakup created multiple worlds, each with its own climate, its own seasonal patterns, its own unique combination of challenges and opportunities. Life was no longer limited to finding different ways to succeed in one environment. Instead, it could explore fundamentally different approaches to existence itself. As you breathe even more slowly now, feeling your body settling into complete relaxation, consider how this multiplication of environments led to an acceleration of evolutionary creativity that continues to influence life today. The mammals that survived the great transitions of Pangea's final period found themselves inheriting a world of unprecedented opportunity, with the dinosaurs eventually giving way to new forms of life, and with multiple continents providing multiple venues for evolutionary experimentation. Mammals began to diversify in ways that would eventually lead to the credible variety of mammalian life we see today. From tiny shrews to enormous whales, from burrowing moles to soaring bats, from swift antelopes to slow-moving sloths. The mammalian radiation that followed the breakup of Pangea explored virtually every possible way of making a living on planet Earth. This explosion of mammalian diversity was only possible because the separated continents provided isolated venues where different evolutionary experiments could proceed without interference from competing approaches. The oceans that formed during Pangea's breakup also became venues for their own evolutionary experiments. Creatures that had once been restricted to the coastal shallows of the Panthalassa Ocean now had access to multiple smaller oceans, each with its own temperature patterns, its own chemical composition, its own unique characteristics. This led to the diversification of marine life that populated the new Atlantic, Indian, and expanding Pacific Oceans, with communities of creatures specially adapted to each unique marine environment. As the slow farewell of Pangea continued over tens of millions of years, the Earth gradually transformed from a world with one continent and one ocean to a world with multiple continents and multiple oceans, each with its own distinct character, its own climate patterns, its own unique assemblage of life forms. This transformation created the geographically diverse biologically rich world that we inhabit today, where a journey from one continent to another can reveal completely different approaches to the fundamental challenges of life. The process was so gradual, so patient, so gentle, that it's easy to imagine it as a kind of cosmic meditation, a slow, peaceful transition from one state of being to another. There was no rushing, no violence, no sudden catastrophic changes, just the steady, inexorable work of geological forces moving at their own patient pace, allowing life all the time it needed to adapt, to explore, to discover new ways of flourishing in an ever-changing world. And though Pangea is long gone, its influence still shapes our world in ways we feel every day. In the distribution of similar fossils on continents now separated by vast oceans, in the way mountain ranges on different continents seem to match up perfectly when the continents are mentally reassembled, in the deep geological structures that still influence the movement of groundwater and the formation of mineral deposits, and in the very DNA of living creatures that still carries the signature of their common ancestry in that ancient, unified world. As your breathing becomes slower and deeper with each passing moment, let's gently explore how that ancient, unified world continues to touch your life in ways both profound and comforting. Though Pangea dissolved into the separate continents we know today hundreds of millions of years ago, its echo still resonates through our world like the lingering warmth of a fire long after the flames have died down. Tonight, as you prepare to surrender to sleep, you can rest in the knowledge that you are intimately connected to this ancient story, that the very atoms in your body once danced through the forests and deserts of that magnificent supercontinent. Take a long, slow breath with me now, and as you do, imagine standing in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern North America, looking out over the ancient, worn peaks that rise gently through the morning mist. These mountains, weathered smooth by hundreds of millions of years of rain and wind, hold within their stone heart one of the most beautiful proofs that Pangea once existed. As you breathe out slowly, picture yourself traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, across the vast blue expanse that now separates North America from Europe, until you find yourself standing in the Scottish Highlands, looking out over peaks that seem remarkably familiar, the mountains of Scotland. It turns out are not just similar to the Appalachians, they are literally the same mountain range, torn apart by the slow birth of the Atlantic Ocean and now separated by thousands of miles of deep water. When geologists first made this discovery, it was like finding two halves of a torn photograph that perfectly matched when placed side by side. The rocks in both mountain ranges are not merely similar. They are identical, formed in the same ancient collisions, shaped by the same primordial forces, telling the same story in the language of stone and crystal that transcends the barriers of modern geography. As you continue to relax more deeply, imagine the wonder of this realization slowly settling into your consciousness like a warm blanket. The mountains you might hike on a vacation to New England were once connected to the highlands where Scottish shepherds still graze their flocks. The granite beneath your feet in New Hampshire formed in the same deep earth furnaces that created the bedrock of Ireland. The same ancient rivers that carved valleys in what is now Nova Scotia once continued their journey through what are now the fields of Wales, Pangeas. Unity lives on in these geological connections that no amount of time or distance can truly break. My mother might have had relatives who wandered in a different direction during their lifetimes, perhaps following seasonal migration routes or simply exploring new territories as their ancestors had done for countless generations. when these relatives died and were fossilized in what would become different continents. They created a permanent record of Pangea's unity, a message written in stone that would survive the breakup of the supercontinent and eventually help modern humans understand their planet's incredible history. The discovery of these identical fossils on now distant continents was one of the key pieces of evidence that convinced scientists that Pangea had actually existed. It was like finding the same handwriting in letters scattered around the world, proof that they had all been written by the same author at the same time in the same place. When Alfred Wegener first proposed the theory of continental drift in the early 20th century, many geologists were skeptical. How could entire continents move? What force could be powerful enough to push such massive pieces of the Earth's crust across thousands of miles of ocean? But the fossils didn't lie. The same plant species preserved in coal deposits in Pennsylvania and similar coal deposits in Germany, the same distinctive reptile bones found in both Brazil and South Africa, the same ancient marine creatures embedded in rocks that now sit at the tops of mountains on different continents. Slowly, methodically, the evidence accumulated until it became impossible to deny that these now separate landmasses had once been joined together in a single, unified world. As you sink deeper into relaxation, consider how comforting this geological detective story becomes when viewed from the perspective of deep time. The scientists who pieced together the evidence for Pangea were not just solving an intellectual puzzle. They were discovering that our planet has a kind of memory encoded in its rocks and fossils, a way of preserving the stories of ancient worlds that existed long before any human consciousness was there to witness them. This means that the Earth itself is a vast library, holding countless stories of transformation and change, all preserved with patient care for future generations to discover and appreciate. The evidence for Pangea's existence extends far beyond fossils and matching mountain ranges. Climate scientists have discovered that the arrangement of continents during the time of Pangea created weather patterns so different from our modern climate that they seem almost alien. Computer models of Pangean climate reveal a world where the interior deserts we explored earlier were indeed vast and extreme, but also a world where certain regions experienced monsoons so powerful they would dwarf any weather system on our modern Earth. These ancient climate patterns have left their own kind of fossil record in the form of distinctive rock layers that can only form under very specific weather conditions. Geologists have found evidence of these extreme Pangean climates preserved in rocks around the world, creating another thread in the tapestry of evidence that confirms the supercontinent's existence. The red sandstones that formed in Pangea's interior deserts can be found today from the American Southwest to the British Isles, all bearing the distinctive signatures of the same arid, continental climate that characterized the heart of the ancient supercontinent. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Pangea's continuing influence is that it never really ended. As you breathe slowly and deeply, feeling your body settle into complete relaxation, consider this amazing fact. The same forces that broke Pangea apart are still active today. The continents are still moving, still drifting slowly across the Earth's surface, still following the deep currents of molten rock that flow far beneath our feet. Every year, North America moves about an inch further away from Europe. Every year, the Atlantic Ocean grows slightly wider, the Pacific slightly narrower, as the great geological dance that began with Pangea's breakup continues its patient, inexorable choreography. This means that you are living through the next chapter of the same story we've been exploring together tonight. You are not just connected to Pangea through the rocks beneath your feet and the fossils in museum displays. You are actively participating in the ongoing transformation of our planet's surface. The ground you sleep on tonight is moving, slowly and imperceptibly, carrying you on a journey that will take millions of years to complete but never stops. Not even for a moment. GPS satellites that orbit high above the Earth can now measure this movement directly, confirming with space-age precision what geologists had deduced from studying ancient rocks. Hawaii moves toward Alaska at about the same rate your fingernails grow. Australia slides northward toward Asia like an enormous ship on an ocean of molten stone. Africa rotates slowly counterclockwise, gradually closing the Mediterranean Sea while opening the Red Sea wider. All around the globe, the continents continue their ancient dance, following the same deep rhythms that once brought Pangea together and then gently carried it apart. Understanding your place in this vast, slow transformation can bring a profound sense of peace and perspective to the concerns and worries of daily life. As you continue to breathe deeply and regularly, imagine your current troubles and anxieties from the perspective of geological time. The deadline that seems so urgent this week, the relationship challenge that keeps you awake at night, the financial worry that feels overwhelming. All of these very real and important human concerns exist within the same temporal framework that includes the patient movement of continents and the slow transformation of ocean basins. This doesn't make your concerns less valid or important, but it does place them within a larger context of planetary patience and persistence that can be deeply comforting. The Earth has been through countless transformations, countless challenges, countless periods of change and uncertainty. It has seen supercontinents form and break apart, ice ages come and go, mass extinctions followed by evolutionary radiations of new life forms. Through all of these dramatic changes, the planet has maintained its essential stability, its capacity to support life, its gentle rotation through space that brings us day and night, seasons and years, with reassuring regularity. You are part of this larger story, this vast narrative of planetary patience and resilience. The same forces that guided Pangea through its long history of assembly and breakup are present in your own life, in your own capacity to adapt to change, to find new ways of thriving when old patterns no longer serve you, to trust in the deeper rhythms that sustain all life on this ancient, ever-changing world. The genetic evidence for our connection to Pangea's survivors is perhaps the most intimate way that the supercontinent continues to influence our lives. Deep within your DNA, encoded in sequences of molecules so small they can't be seen even with the most powerful microscopes, lie the molecular signatures of survival strategies that were first developed by creatures living hundreds of millions of years ago in the forests and deserts of Pangea. The biochemical pathways that allow your cells to extract energy from food, the molecular mechanisms that regulate your sleep and waking cycles, the genetic programs that guide your development from a single cell into a complex multicellular organism. All of these fundamental aspects of your existence can be traced back through an unbroken lineage to those small mermaid survivors who made their homes in the changing world of the late supercontinent. As you allow your breathing to become even slower and more peaceful, consider the incredible journey that your genetic heritage has taken to reach you. The DNA in your cells carries within it the molecular memory of countless adaptations, countless survival strategies that were tested and refined in the challenging environments of Pangea and its aftermath. Every time your heart beats, every time your lungs fill with air, Every time your brain processes a thought or your immune system fights off an infection, you are benefiting from evolutionary innovations that were first developed by creatures whose fossilized remains now lie buried in rocks around the world. This genetic connection to the ancient past creates a kind of immortality that transcends individual lifetimes. Though the small mammals who survived Pangea's great transitions died long ago, something essential of their nature lives on in you, in every human being, in every mammal currently alive on Earth. You are not just a descendant of these ancient survivors. You are, in a very real sense, a continuation of their existence, carrying forward their genetic legacy into a future they could never have imagined. The comfort of deep time and Earth's cycles becomes most apparent when we consider how the perspective of geological time can transform our understanding of permanence and change, the things that seem most solid and unchanging in our daily lives. The mountains that have stood for as long as humans have recorded history, the ocean basins that seem as eternal as anything on Earth, even the positions of the continents themselves. All of these apparently permanent features are actually part of cycles so vast and slow that they're normally invisible to human perception. Asterisk. This geological perspective reveals that change and stability are not opposites, but rather different aspects of the same fundamental process. The Earth maintains its overall stability precisely because it's constantly changing, constantly adjusting, constantly finding new equilibriums as conditions shift and evolve. The continents that seem so fixed and permanent are actually floating on a sea of molten rock, held in dynamic balance by forces so vast they can move mountain ranges and create new ocean basins. Asterisk. As you continue to sink deeper into relaxation, imagine yourself floating peacefully in this same kind of dynamic balance. Just as the Earth maintains its stability through constant, gentle adjustment to changing conditions, you too can find stability not by resisting change but by learning to flow with it, to adapt gracefully to new circumstances while maintaining your essential core identity. The same wisdom that has guided the planet through billions of years of transformation is available to you in your own life, in your own journey through the inevitable changes and challenges that are part of the human experience. Asterisk. What Pangea teaches us about permanence and change is that neither exists in isolation. The supercontinent seemed permanent to the creatures that lived on it, yet it was actually a temporary arrangement in a much larger cycle of continental assembly and breakup. Our modern continents seem permanent to us, yet they too are temporary arrangements that will eventually be reconfigured into new patterns as the planet continues its ancient dance of transformation. This perspective doesn't diminish the reality or importance of either Pangea or our current continental arrangement, but it does place them within a larger context of cyclical change that can be deeply reassuring. Asterisk. Understanding these cycles can help us develop what might be called geological wisdom, an ability to distinguish between what truly matters and what is simply the temporary arrangement of circumstances in which we happen to find ourselves. Just as the essential life force that animated the creatures of Pangea continues to flow through their modern descendants, the essential aspects of your own identity and purpose can persist through whatever changes and transformations your life may bring. Asterisk. The rocks beneath your feet tonight contain the physical memory of countless such transformations. Every grain of sand was once part of a mountain that was worn away by centuries of weather. Every limestone cliff was once the bottom of a sea teeming with life. Every piece of granite was once molten rock deep within the earth. slowly cooled and crystallized over millions of years before being brought to the surface by the patient work of geological forces. The very ground that supports you as you rest is made of recycled materials, ancient substances that have been mountain and seafloor, desert sand and riverbed, countless times over the course of Earth's long history. Asterisk. This constant recycling of the Earth's materials mirrors the constant recycling of life itself. The carbon atoms in your body were once part of ancient plants that grew in Pangean forests. The calcium in your bones may have once been part of the shells of marine creatures that lived in the Panthalassa Ocean. The iron in your blood may have been forged in the heart of a star that exploded billions of years ago, scattering its elements into the cosmic dust from which our solar system eventually formed. You are literally made of star stuff and ancient Earth, a temporary arrangement of materials that have been part of countless other forms and will continue their journey through countless transformations long after your current form has returned to the elements from which it came. Asterisk. This perspective on the recycling of matter and energy can bring a profound sense of connection to the larger processes that sustain all life. You are not separate from the natural world. You are an integral part of it, temporarily organized into the complex, beautiful pattern that is your individual existence, but always part of the larger flow of matter and energy that connects all things. When you breathe, you are participating in the same atmospheric circulation that once carried moisture across the vast expanse of Pangea. When you drink water, you are consuming the same H2O molecules that once flowed in the great rivers that crossed the supercontinent from sea to sea. Asterisk. As your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, begin to synchronize it with the deeper rhythms that sustain our planet. Imagine breathing in time with the slow circulation of the oceans, the great currents that carry warmth from the equator toward the poles and cool water back, again in cycles that take thousands of years to complete. Picture your heartbeat aligning with the patient pulse of the Earth's magnetic field, the invisible shield that protects all life from harmful cosmic radiation and has been faithfully maintained by the circulation of molten iron in our planet's core for billions of years. Asterisk. Feel your body settling into harmony with the gentle rotation of the Earth itself, the 24-hour cycle that has been bringing us day and night with reassuring regularity since long before Pangea existed and will continue long after our current continents have drifted into new configurations. This daily rhythm, so fundamental to all life on Earth that it's encoded in our DNA, connects you to every living thing that has ever existed on our planet. The same cycle of light and darkness that regulated the activities of Pangean creatures now regulates your own cycles of waking and sleeping, activity and rest. Asterisk. Tonight, as you prepare to surrender to sleep, you can rest in the knowledge that you are participating in one of the most ancient and universal rhythms in the living world. Sleep is not just a human necessity, it's a fundamental pattern that connects us to the deepest cycles of life itself. The rest that your body craves is the same kind of rest that allows the Earth to process and integrate the experiences of each day, to consolidate memories and repair damage, to prepare for whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow might bring. Asterisk. The story of Pangea teaches us that rest and activity, stability and change, are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of the same natural rhythms that sustain all existence. Just as the supercontinent had its periods of stability and its periods of transformation, just as the Earth has its cycles of building up and wearing down, of gathering together and spreading apart, you too can learn to flow gracefully between periods of engagement and periods of rest. between times of intense activity and times of peaceful restoration. Asterisk. Personal reflection on our place in Earth's long story reveals that we are neither insignificant specks in an indifferent universe, nor the central focus around which everything else revolves. Instead, we are conscious participants in an ancient, ongoing story of cosmic evolution, planetary development, and biological creativity that stretches from the formation of the first stars to whatever unimaginable futures await us. We are the Earth becoming aware of itself, the universe developing consciousness, matter organizing itself into patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. Asterisk. This perspective places human life within a context that is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reveals the vast scales of time and space within which our individual lives unfold, the countless forces and processes that make our existence possible, the incredible improbability and preciousness of conscious awareness arising from inanimate matter. Empowering because it reveals that consciousness itself may be one of the most remarkable achievements in the known universe. That in developing the ability to understand and appreciate the story of Pangea, we are participating in something that may be unique in all of cosmic history. Asterisk. You are not just a product of evolution. You are evolution becoming aware of itself. You are not just a result of geological processes, you are geology developing the capacity for self. When you contemplate the story of Pangea, you are the Earth remembering its own past, understanding its own history, appreciating its own incredible journey from a molten ball of rock to a living world capable of producing creatures that can piece together the evidence of ancient supercontinents and feel wonder at the discovery. Asterisk. This realization can transform the way we experience both the challenges and the joys of human existence. Every difficulty you face is an opportunity for the universe to develop new strategies for overcoming obstacles. Every moment of happiness you experience is the cosmos celebrating its own capacity for joy. Every act of creativity, every gesture of love, every instance of understanding and compassion represents the universe becoming more fully conscious of its own beauty and potential. Asterisk. As you prepare for the final transition into sleep, imagine yourself settling into the same kind of peaceful rest that characterizes the Earth's deepest rhythms. Picture your consciousness gradually releasing its hold on the details and concerns of waking life, allowing itself to drift into the same kind of restorative state that allows seeds to germinate in the soil, that allows damaged tissues to heal during the night, that allows memories to be processed and integrated during dreams. Asterisk. The transition to sleep can become a kind of meditation on geological time, a practice of surrendering to rhythms that are older and deeper than individual consciousness. As your breathing slows and your heartbeat settles into its quiet nighttime rhythm, you can feel yourself sinking into harmony with the patient pulse of the planet itself. Your individual awareness begins to merge with the larger awareness that somehow permeates all of existence. The mysterious capacity for experience and understanding that seems to be an inherent property of matter and energy. When they organize themselves into sufficiently complex patterns, asterisk, sleep becomes a return to the source, a temporary dissolution of the boundaries that normally separate your individual consciousness from the larger field of awareness that includes all life, all matter, all energy, all possibility. In sleep, you rejoin the unconscious wisdom that guided the formation of Pangea, the breaking apart of the supercontinent, the evolution of life through countless transformations, the development of consciousness itself. You become part of the dreaming Earth, participating in whatever vast, Slow dreams our planet dreams as it spins through space, carrying its cargo of living conscious beings toward futures that none of us can imagine. Asterisk. Breathing with Earth's ancient rhythms means surrendering to cycles that are older than human history, older than mammalian evolution, older than the breakup of Pangea itself. These are the rhythms of stellar formation and planetary cooling, of atmospheric development and ocean circulation, of the patient building up and wearing away of mountain ranges, of the slow dance of continents across the face of the globe. Tonight, as sleep carries you deeper into rest, you can feel yourself becoming part of these vast, peaceful cycles. Your individual existence merging into the larger existence that includes all things. Asterisk. The echo of Pangea that still resonates through our world is ultimately the echo of unity. The memory of a time when everything was connected, when you could walk from any part of the world to any other part without ever crossing an ocean. Though that physical unity no longer exists, the deeper unity that it represented, the fundamental interconnectedness of all matter and energy, all life and consciousness, remains as true today as it was 300 million years ago when the supercontinent reached its greatest extent. Asterisk. In your dreams tonight, you may find yourself walking across that ancient, unified landscape, breathing the thick air of Pangean forests, feeling the warm soil of the supercontinent beneath your feet. You may encounter the creatures that lived in that long-vanished world, the small mammals that carried the seeds of your own lineage through the great transformations that followed. You may stand on the shores of the Panthalassa Ocean and feel the vast peace of a world where everything belonged to everything else, where separation was unknown and connection was the fundamental truth of existence. Asterisk. When you wake tomorrow, you will carry something of that ancient unity with you into the separated world of modern continents and isolated landmasses. You will remember that beneath the apparent divisions of our current geography lies a deeper reality of connection that no amount of time or distance can break. The same forces that created Pangea and gently carried it apart continue to work today, weaving patterns of connection and transformation that link all things in an endless dance of becoming. Asterisk. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this ancient story, this ongoing transformation, this patient working of forces so vast and gentle that they can move continents and create new worlds while allowing every individual life to unfold in its own perfect timing. Sleep in the embrace of deep time, in the comfort of Earth's ancient rhythms, in the peace of knowing that you belong completely to this ancient, ever-changing, ever-loving world that dreams through you as you dream through it, that breathes through you as you breathe through it, that lives through you as you live through it, in the eternal now that includes all moments, all places, all possibilities, in the unity that was Pangea and is still and always will be, the deepest truth of existence itself. Asterisk.